Thank you, Jordan. Richard, if you go to the next slide, we're going to jump right into it and talk a little bit about what we're going to cover this afternoon. And we're going to start with some brief introductions about who we are, and then we're going to talk more about where we're going to begin this journey. A lot of us are here probably to understand a journey of PeopleSoft to cloud and what that transformation might look like. So we'll set a baseline and then talk a little bit about what a transformation mindset might look like and how we envision a path to cloud and what those various steps are. Richard's then going to take us through how you plan for a roadmap, and then we'll talk about a couple of key takeaways at the very end. So if you could go to the next slide, Richard. We'll do some introductions briefly. So I'm Chris Kostix. I'm one of the partners at Elire. I used to work at PeopleSoft in the late 90s, helped start the company in 2005. And after spending 2/3 of my career doing PeopleSoft implementations, I had the opportunity to take one of our long-term PeopleSoft customers to the cloud. And then since for the last many years, I've been helping organizations like that one and learning and being able to share those stories with other organizations like you. Right now, I oversee our cloud delivery teams, so our HCM, ERP, and EPM teams report up to me. Richard?
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Richard Merrill. I'm also a partner with Elire, and like Chris, I've been doing this, for close to 25 years, but from a slightly different angle. He comes at it from the technology side of things. I come at it from more the people, process, and strategy. So my role has always been helping clients and customers figure out what's the right technology for them. How do they reinvent their business processes to take advantage of it? How do they get their people ready to use the systems? And I've done this over all of these years for PeopleSoft, Oracle ERP, HCM, as well as lots of other systems from Salesforce and everything else. So Chris and our teams always work together, and we're happy to work together today on this webinar to tell you more.
All right, thanks, Richard. If you can move to the next slide. So just really briefly about Elire. Like I said, we've been in business since 2005, and we've spent a lot of time doing PeopleSoft implementation projects, but we don't look at implementation projects as just a simple system. When we look at things, we look at it holistically. We look at the people, processes, and the system together and really try to help deliver solutions that work for our clients. And at the end of the day, our main goal is to be our client's trusted advisor, and we've helped many customers make this cloud transition. We continue to have a thriving PeopleSoft practice, and we work on the cloud as well and some other systems. And like Richard said, help a lot with business process and re-engineering and helping that transition to Oracle Cloud. If you could hit the next slide, just some real quick stats. We've been doing cloud transformations from PeopleSoft for about the last 8 years, and we've, over the time, built a lot of accelerators to help with that journey, including many tools that are built within PeopleSoft, which as a former developer, I used to develop an app designer all the time, and a lot of those tools help with that process. We're going to hit on a couple of those a little later. But if you could go to the next slide. Oh, we're going to do a poll first. So Jordan, can you take this one?
Yes, I can. So on your screen now, we have our first poll question. Before we get into, again, the meat of the presentation, we want to kind of get a feel for the room here. So where is your organization currently at on your path to cloud? Have you somehow never looked at it before? Are you curious but cautious, kind of tipping around? Are you starting your cloud planning or road mapping, but maybe don't have a full-on plan of action? Do you already have an established cloud roadmap? Are you maybe beginning that cloud transformation or implementation, or live on cloud in some capacity? We'll give everyone just a couple of seconds to answer. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and close this out. So it looks like we're kind of across the board, but predominantly in that curious but cautious, as well as that starting to plan and starting to roadmap. Chris, back to you.
Thanks. Those are great results, and that's what that's what we're targeting. We're targeting a lot of the how do you start that process, and some of you have started, and it looks like you even have somebody who's live. And one of our goals has always been to meet our customers wherever they are in that journey. But today we are going to be focusing quite a bit more on the early part of that journey. So where do we begin? What we understand, we're going to do a little baseline here. What we understand about many of you who are in that early phase of this, because we've been there ourselves. When I first learned how to do cloud, I understood a lot of these things because I was a PeopleSoft implementation person, and then had to go through that journey myself. Now that we've been there and seen where many other organizations, these are some of the common areas. So one, we know you have a significant investment in PeopleSoft. Many of you have been on PeopleSoft for 20 plus years. You've invested in the teams, the processes, and everything around that back office, critical back office system. Moving to the cloud is a complex decision. So we also know that this decision is very complex. I've been to presentations over the last handful of years where we start talking about cloud and people raise their hand and they say, are you talking about the SaaS-based cloud application? Or are you talking about infrastructure? And today we're talking about the SaaS-based movement of, from a PeopleSoft application standpoint to a cloud, Oracle Cloud, SaaS-based cloud application. But many organizations have been in some part of a cloud journey since probably the mid 2000s when they started moving email and other infrastructure pieces to the cloud. But with back office is a little more complex because everybody has their system. So it's a very complex decision to figure out which pieces, when to move them, and we understand that. The next piece that we truly understand is that not only is your organization investing in optimizing your system, doing upgrades, putting new team members out there, training, and everything around what supporting PeopleSoft really is. We also know that Oracle is also supporting PeopleSoft and continuing to invest, and that makes that decision a little complex as well, trying to understand what should be moved and when you should move. And then finally, the customizations within PeopleSoft. I mentioned that I used to develop an app designer. One of the things I loved about PeopleSoft is that you could do anything within PeopleSoft. We learned pretty early on that you shouldn't do anything, but you still could do anything, and many organizations took a lot of liberty with that. And it's not just the customizations themselves. Sometimes you have a bolt-on, but it's really the business process around there. And how do you make that move from a very heavily customized system, or even a slightly customized system with bolt-ons, to a SaaS-based application? So those are some of the things that we do deeply understand about where you're coming from. If you could go to the next slide. The other thing we understand is some of the turbulence and some of the challenges that you're going to run into as you make this migration to cloud, or start thinking about that migration to cloud. One is the customizations that I've talked about. One common misconception is that cloud does not have ability to customize or modify or have bolt-ons, and there are a number of tools. When we first started probably about 8 years ago, there were still tools, maybe a little less than there are today, but there is a number of ways to enhance the system. We don't like to say customization still, but there are potentially some big unique things that you've had to build, bolt-ons or things for your business that are unique, that will be a gap in the new application, and there's ways to accommodate that. But it is an opportunity to not have as many customizations going forward, and that's a big part of this process. You may have outdated tools and outdated tech stack. That's a challenge in trying to get up to where you need to be able to support and maintain during this transition. You may be behind on PUM updates. One of the biggest challenges that we see customers is they will, some are up to date on PUM images, but they don't get to take advantage of all the new features that come out because they're just simply maintaining and trying to stay up to date. Many of you may not be up to date, and that's something that, even though you may be considering a cloud move or are in the process of a cloud move, you will still be on PeopleSoft for a number of years. So how do you maintain your existing system while still thinking forward? Business process alignment. One of the big pieces is being open to potentially changing some big business processes that you have within your organization. And we often come into organizations that when they make that migration to cloud, they haven't thought through their business processes or what it may look like. And those are some of the things that Richard's going to talk about in a bit that you can start doing now, even if you haven't started your migration to cloud. And then finally, resistance to change. One of the biggest factors we see, and this is not just within technology, I think it's our human nature that we're all resistant to change. And cloud and moving to a SaaS-based application will have a lot of change. Whether you've been successful in the past with other implementations or not, or new rollouts, this is an opportunity to really start thinking through how to be ready and prepare your organization for a change like cloud. So next, we're going to talk about the transformation mindset and really how we at Elire have thought through and think about the journey to cloud. So if you can go to the next slide, Richard. Back early when I was doing implementations, when you would go live, we would always call it day one was when you're live. And, you know, we didn't really talk about day two in the future, but it was always what happens on day one once you're live. We've taken that analogy and really thought through the journey to cloud and broken it up into 3 days. So day zero, what we consider day zero, is when you're currently on PeopleSoft. And we like to think of your current investment of PeopleSoft as something that's not going away right away, even for those that have answered that they're in the midst of a cloud transformation. That cloud transformation may be a year or 2 years, and it may be part of your PeopleSoft application while leaving some behind, and we call that coexistence. So depending on your rollout, you live with PeopleSoft for a long time, even when you decided I'm going to move to cloud. So how do we maximize that, and how do we get the most out of your system, because it's a critical system for supporting your operations and maybe for several years from now. And for those that haven't yet even started the journey, you may be thinking, well, we're going to cloud in the future. Why would I do anything in the current system? And it really is an opportunity to start thinking about your existing PeopleSoft systems, your next PUM upgrade, and thinking about what can I do to be a little more cloud ready. So our day zero, we have a lot of services really driven by our PeopleSoft practice that focuses around your existing PeopleSoft investment while it remains before you're fully transitioned over to cloud. Day one is your implementation itself. That's the, you know, you've gone live, whether it's a big bang with multiple suites, HCM, ERP, and EPM, or it's one suite, or it's a simply one module where you're doing coexistence with your PeopleSoft implementation. Day one is often just laying the groundwork. A lot of times you'll see these amazing demos that Oracle produces, and there are so many great features because the product has evolved so much. But often the implementation itself, you're really laying the foundation to be able to see and use all of those great features that the cloud platform offers. So that's your day one. Day two is when we really optimize, and that's when you start taking advantage of the full cloud suite. You add either modules and enhancements, or new features like some of the AI or the chatbots and things like that that continually get improved through the innovation at Oracle. If you could go to the next slide. So I mentioned day zero, day one, and day two. We've broken up the different types of offerings that we do within our organization and really trying to cater to where is an organization on that journey. Are they pre-9.2? They haven't even upgraded to 9.2. That's a good opportunity to say, well, you could upgrade to 9.2, but it's a really good opportunity to say, let's look at cloud. What does that mean to move directly to cloud? If you do an upgrade, then you may want to do an upgrade to remove customizations. You may have some reasons why you need to stay on PeopleSoft, investments in hardware or whatever that is. So we think about that as a pre-9.2. Then we have 9, if you're on 9.2, but you haven't kept up to date with PUM images, you haven't implemented some of the new features, or you're completely up to date and everything is running perfectly, there's still new opportunities that you can use. Because like I said, you're on this system for potentially 1 to 5 years while you're going through this transformation. And then finally, the other big piece of day zero is really road mapping that Richard's going to talk about high level. And then we have our implementation approaches and what we do there, and finally the various optimization pieces that we do. If you could go to the next slide. I'm going to hand it over to Richard to talk about what we do with this road mapping exercise.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. I appreciate it. And so everyone, you know, as Chris had mentioned, within day zero, you're really maximizing the investment that you currently have and getting ready to get to day one, right? And we really believe that before taking that first step, you know, you really should define what is your overall cloud strategy. So if you're thinking, as you look at the bottom of the page, and some of these are difficult to answer questions, you know, like how will I use this transformation to reduce my costs? Or how will I use it to become a more agile workplace? Or as I transform my technology, is it an opportunity to transform my business processes and make them more efficient? Or maybe even look at roles and responsibilities and what my organization looks like. There's a number of other boxes here, but I think you all get the picture. But, you know, it's really an opportunity while you're in day zero to think very holistically and start to come up with that larger cloud roadmap and cloud strategy while you're still in day zero, right? Because it's going to help you make better decisions and be better prepared for a more successful go live, a more successful day one. Now, that's easier said than done, right? So how do you actually do that? How do you plan your roadmap? And we have come up with a tool that we call the readiness assessment. It covers a lot of those categories I was just talking about, plus additional ones. And we're going to walk you through this. There are 11 different categories. We've grouped them into 3 different buckets that I'll talk to you about in a moment. But the idea here is to really assess your organization's overall level of maturity. If you're really good at answering these questions and have a plan in place, then that means you are better prepared to pull the trigger and begin the implementation to get to day one. If some of these areas are feeling a little wobbly and you're a little unsure, then it might be a moment to really press pause and make sure you have your roadmap, you have your strategy in place. Because a lot of these are tricky questions. A lot of them can get in the way of a successful implementation. And we'd rather you have all your ducks in a row prior to beginning the implementation than trying to figure this out while you're implementing, right? So let's actually take a deeper look at this 11 different criteria that we developed. And the first section is around people readiness. And so we'll walk through these 4 different ones: motivation, governance, resource, planning, and change management. And as I go, think about how you as an organization would answer some of these questions. Again, the more confident you are, the more organized you are in these categories, the closer you are to saying, all right, you know what, let's kick off this implementation next week. If you're not as confident, it might mean it's time to take a moment to do a little more planning and a little more strategy. So the first is motivation readiness. Like, you know, why are you really beginning the journey from day zero to day one? Do you understand your business objectives? What are you actually trying to achieve as a business? And then do you have guiding principles in place to make sure that you achieve those goals? Have you been working across departments and divisions for stakeholder buy-in? Is this something that IT and the business are working on together? Is it something you're thinking about individually? Is everyone aligned and on the same page? And then how are you actually going to measure whether you're successful or not? You know, if one of your objectives is to reduce some sort of turnaround time or improve efficiency or save dollars, then how are you actually going to capture that and measure it and make sure those promises you're making in a business case are going to be actually achieved? So the more you can answer those questions, the higher your level of maturity and the better your motivation is for a successful implementation. The second people category is governance readiness. do you have a governance framework in place to run large implementations like this? You know, that includes experienced project managers, steering committees, decision-making frameworks. And those stakeholders we talked about on the last page about having them aligned, do you actually have a plan to keep them engaged through the whole process? You know, as you're making tough decisions around scope, tough decisions around design requirements, is all those stakeholders being engaged? Do you have a framework to make all of those decisions? And with this one, we're really looking at, you know, have you recently done a big technology implementation or upgrade? And is this you have a proven framework, you have a proven method for engaging stakeholders? If the answer is yes, it means you're more mature and you're ready to begin implementation. If not, then during your planning stage, we recommend you flush out and figure out, you know, what governance should look like. The next one is change management. Again, this is a great opportunity to assess recent projects. Did you have good strategies in place that were well executed when it comes to communication, when it comes to stakeholder engagement? Same with training. Do you have training resources in place, training tools, a training system? How do you keep training materials up to date? When you hire people, how are they really learning the system today? And again, if you're answering these, you know, it is not as confident, then we would recommend spending a little bit more time on planning to shore up these areas, because again, you'd rather do it now than in the middle of an implementation. Next is resource strategy. So this is another people category, right? As you're thinking about existing application support, as you're thinking about who's going to be on the implementation team, as you're thinking about once you go live on day one, who's going to support it, do you have all those roles identified? And do you have people slotted for those roles? And, you know, all of our organizations face resource constraints, right? Where we have a few critical people, and if they spend all their time on current system support, then how are they going to spend time on the implementation? How are they going to learn to support it post go live? Those are not easy questions to answer. And the answer really shouldn't be, well, we'll just work overtime nights and weekends, because that's just not a sustainable model over the course of a year or however long it might take to go live. So we really, again, these are great questions to answer now, if you don't have them, rather than in the middle of the implementation. So I'll throw it back to Joel too.
Thank you, Richard. So now taking into consideration the people readiness factors that Richard mentioned, which of these strategies do you foresee as a challenge for your organization? And you can select all that apply. So thinking through is motivation readiness, governance readiness, change management, or that resource strategy readiness. Which of these are you maybe not feeling the best about? And we will give a couple seconds to answer here. And we'll give just a second, get those final answers in. And I'm going to go ahead and close it out. So it looks like with our crew we have on here today, kind of spread across the board, but it looks like that resource strategy readiness is what's given the most cause for concern, Richard. And I will pass it back to you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And we know, I think around 70% of you are in that starting phase, or you're curious, right? And so, you know, you have time, right? Because you're in early stages here, and you're in a webinar like this, so you're gathering information. So you have time to start thinking about what are those key roles and how am I going to staff them, and making decisions about that. So as we move into the next category, it's really around process readiness. So again, we just got done talking about people. Let's talk a little bit about process. And there's two of these. And the first one is deployment strategy. And, you know, this really involves a few things that Chris had hit on, which is, do you understand that deployment approach, right? Are you going to go big bang, rip the Band-Aid off, or will you have some sort of coexistence strategy that has a few modules, perhaps on PeopleSoft, others in the cloud? Have you really figured that out, and what's the order and the correct order of implementation? And then as you implement, how big are you going to go? Are you going to do complete transformation? You know, Oracle does a beautiful job designing these systems to take advantage of best practices. So are you going to move into the world of Oracle best practices and do a complete transformation, or just lift and shift manual, processes up into the cloud? A lot of times different people in the organization have different points of view on that, right? And so figuring that out is really important, because you'd rather figure that out now than in the middle of a requirements design session. A lot of us know, oh, we need to go live by 2025, or, someone on high passed down a date, and maybe the date is known, but what are all the milestones to get you there? And then what's the risks associated with your deployment strategy, right? There are risks with going big bang. There are risks with coexistence. There are risks with transformation and lift and shift. Do you understand them? Are you balancing them? And then what's the role of a consulting partner, right? You're probably not going to do this on your own. You're probably going to rely on a consulting partner who has proven implementation experience. And for those, 61% of you that are worried about resources and resource allocation, a consulting partner might be a good solution to help support the current app, or the implementation of the new app, and it's certainly post-go live support. So again, it's better to figure all of those out now than when you're deep into testing. The second process category is around business process mapping. So, do you understand all of your business processes today and how those requirements compare to cloud capabilities? And have you gone deeper than a high-level demo and started to really figure out what's going to fit and not fit? And are you going to have gaps? And if you have gaps in capabilities, in functionalities, in covering yourself on those customizations, what's going to be your action plan? The action plan could be, redo your business processes and go to best practice. It might be rely on a third-party application and tie it into Oracle. But again, really understanding that and figuring that out while you're signing contracts is the way to go, as opposed to, again, finding out during test cycle 1 that you have a major process gap and then scrambling to figure out how to close it. And I'll take another pause for Jordan to do a poll.
Yes, I'm back again. So here we're going to talk a little bit about process readiness. So looking more at those individual strategies that Richard mentioned, what process strategies do you foresee as a challenge for your organization? Again, is it figuring out your deployment strategy, maybe assessing that timeline and milestones, or figuring out your risk assessment and mitigation plan? So take a minute, go ahead and answer. Again, this is a select all that apply, so feel free to select multiple, and we will give it just a second. Just a quick reminder, as everyone is filling out the polls, we will leave a few minutes, for Q&A at the end of the presentation. So if you do have questions as we're going through these individual readiness strategies, please feel free to drop them either in the chat or in the Q&A portal, and we'll answer them at the end of the presentation. Good, just one more second, get those final answers in. And we'll go ahead and share. So again, kind of across the board, but it looks like our top troublemakers here are going to be figuring out that transformational versus lift and shift approach, as well as figuring out business process mapping. Back to you, Richard.
Yeah, thank you all for that, and thank you for being participatory. You know, we've probably all been on projects where in the middle of implementation, you're realizing that you don't have all your requirements of your process and that there are gaps in place. And maybe you got to that destination because some people assumed you were going to transform and reinvent it, while others thought you would just lift and shift it and figure it out and do manual workarounds and keep Excel going, you know. So again, figuring that out now is so much less stressful and so much better while you're in day zero than again right in the middle of an implementation, you know, 2 or 3 months before go live. So if you're answering, you know, to some of these questions makes you feel like you're a little less mature, then you know you're in the right place, because you should be spending a little more time on planning and developing your strategy. The final section is systems readiness. And, you know, there are 5 different ones here that cover a host of topics regarding architecture, reporting, customizations, etc. And we'll just dive into these as well. And first is technical architecture. And this is, you know, do you really understand, if you think about your systems today, and you know, not just your core systems, but those ancillary systems, the Oracle systems, the third-party systems, you probably understand how they all fit today and have an enterprise architecture diagram. But do you understand what that's going to look like in the future, particularly if you're thinking of a coexistence strategy, where, remember, coexistence is you're not going big bang, but over time, you're going to phase in cloud and phase out PeopleSoft. So that means that architecture diagram is morphing over the years and could really start to ask some complicated questions. And having that point of view established early on makes a lot of sense, as well as how you're handling your data. We're going to talk data conversion in a minute, but what's your overall data strategy? Where is data going to reside? Is it residing in core systems? Is it residing in a warehouse? Is it residing in third-party applications? And then what's integrations going to look like? And how might integrations change if you're, you know, evolving over time with a coexistence strategy? And then finally, you know, do you have proven tools in place for integrations, right? And are you ready to leverage those tools as you move forward? The second one is data conversion. I mentioned that was coming. The first one might be something a lot of you are less familiar with, right? Because you all know PeopleSoft like the back of your hand, but you may not know cloud as well. So you're not alone if you're thinking, well, how does my table structure and PeopleSoft line up to that in cloud? Those are great questions to ask. But a question a lot of folks don't always think about is data quality, and how much of that data will need to be scrubbed and cleaned as you move it from one system to the other. You know, certain things like positions, addresses, basic concepts can be treated rather differently in the cloud than in PeopleSoft. And we have found a lot of clients sort of underestimate the need to clean up that data so that they can then successfully map it and, you know, transform it and convert it. And speaking of conversion, when you have to do that, how is it going to be done? We know a big chunk of you are worried about resources. Converting data is time intensive, right? Do you have accelerator tools or other tools that you'll be able to take advantage of? And then finally, your archiving strategy. You know, for the data that doesn't move, what are you going to do with it and how will you access it? But I'm going to throw it over to Chris real quick and let him talk a little bit more about data and data conversion.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. And this is not just a shameless plug, I promise. We've built a data conversion tool and a coexistence tool And I want to more talk about the why behind it than that we have tools themselves. So first off, every implementation cloud, PeopleSoft to cloud that I've been a part of, data conversion is a big part of it. It's one of the largest pieces of it. And you really, when you work with your consulting partner, you often, if they don't have an understanding of PeopleSoft, you will be tasked with gathering or extracting that data from PeopleSoft, which many of you know how to extract the data. But what the challenge is how do you map the constructs in PeopleSoft to the constructs in cloud? And we've done this many times. It's often one of the most challenging parts of a project as far as timeline goes, being able to get the data extracted and then finally loaded into cloud, validated and all that. So those are huge chunks of time that extend a timeline. We've built a tool that has all that mapping because we've done it so many times from PeopleSoft to cloud. And amazingly, the many of the structures, even though many things in cloud are not PeopleSoft based, it might be EBS based structures, they are still very similar because, you know, at the end of the day, a journal is a journal and a worker file or an employment file is an employment file. But we built those and that can really help. The other interesting thing is the other tool we built, which is really kind of the same tool. It's a data sync for that coexist that Richard has talked about a lot. Even though every project I've been on did not necessarily start with the idea of doing coexistence at the beginning, there has always been some module. One example was pension had to continue to be run in PeopleSoft until they could offload it to some third-party pension system. So we had to do coexistence. Or in some cases, it's been planned. Other times, a moved up deadline or payroll is not ready, but HR is ready. You know, different scenarios that force the use of a coexistence strategy. But conversion, if you're getting data from PeopleSoft to cloud and doing that translation and mapping, it's the same thing for your coexistence. So having an understanding of PeopleSoft structures and cloud structures and what that looks like is really important as you think about that journey. So back to you, Richard.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. And so I'll move through into the next one, which is reporting. And a lot of us understand our reports. We're going to have thousands of reports and queries. Do you have that inventory? A lot of you do. But then is there an opportunity to rationalize it? You know, which ones of those are actually being used and adding value? Rather than just duplicate all that existing effort, if you figure out which ones you really need, what's the best way to develop them, that could save you a lot of time and effort, as well as we talked about not all your data is moving. If for that data that didn't move, how are you going to report on it? Security is next, which is understanding all of those roles and permissions to perform transactions and data, right? And how does that work today for PeopleSoft, and how does it need to work in the future? But some of you maybe have special industry-specific requirements and regulations. We deal with those all the time. We work in a lot of sensitive spaces and federal and other instances. And really understanding industry-specific requirements can help make or break a project. And then finally, the last category is customization readiness. You know, Chris talked a lot about this early on, and the ability to customize. You can do a whole lot of configuration in the cloud, but at the end of the day, you're going to have to come to terms with those customizations and not only inventory them, but develop a strategy around them. Because the last thing you want is to realize that customization is going to create a functionality gap. Again, the more you can solve this in day zero, the more you can solve it in the system you know, which is PeopleSoft, the better. And speaking of that, I'll throw it back to Chris, because again, we have some tools that might be able to help.
Yeah, and this is something we developed many years ago. I think back in 2012, and just for our PeopleSoft practice to help assist understanding and assessing where a organization was with their customizations, to help with upgrades and optimizations and things like that. And during our PUM updates, we always use this tool to help try to decustomize when you're doing a PUM upgrade or update. But we also use it heavily for any of our PeopleSoft customers that are moving to cloud. It's a tool that allows us to, I mean, you all, or at least your technical admins, understand how to run a compare report and see where you've customized or touched the PeopleSoft application. But what this does is takes it to another level and really has a much nicer view of how all of your customizations really are. And it's not just at the singular object level, but it's more at the business process level that we group these by, which then allows us to do an analysis on how does this customization, how would it live in the cloud, or do we need it in the cloud? So if you're in those early planning phases, whether you're using a compare report or whatever tools you're using to track customizations, that's a really big step to go through and organize and understand whether you actually need that custom object anymore, or if or where it should live in the new world. And one of the things, if you go to the next slide, Richard, I think it's our scope object tracker. So we've developed another tool. It goes hand in hand with our customization identification tool, and this allows us to read all those objects, those customizations in, and track how we're performing on a PUM update. So if you were a PeopleSoft customer of ours, we added some features that anybody could do. You don't need this tool to do it, and that's why I'm talking about it here. But really, if you're going through your next PUM update, getting a handle of your customizations, looking at it, and if you're doing the PUM update or you're getting help with an SI, or you could bounce it off us and try to help understand. But if we were doing your PUM update, we would have that conversation with you. Where does this customization need to go? Like, do we really need this in this PUM update? Can we remove it? Is it adding business value? What can we do? Can we reorganize our business process around that potential future state? Even if that future state is far off in the distance, can we start doing some of those things now so that our move to cloud in the future will be a little cleaner? And Jordan for poll number 4.
Thank you, Chris. So now looking at all of these different systems, strategies, and considerations, again, which of these do you foresee being the biggest issue for your organization? Is it those technical architecture components, integrations, etc.? Is it figuring out your data conversion readiness, planning for your reporting needs and reporting transformation, adjusting to cloud security and security readiness, or again, evaluating those wonderful but sometimes cumbersome customizations? Just one final plug as well. If anyone has any questions, again, specific to these different readiness strategies or just general PeopleSoft to cloud transformation questions, feel free to drop those in the chat or in the Q&A as we're coming up quick on that Q&A portion. I'm going to go ahead and close it out. And it looks like a little bit of everything, but data conversion and customization readiness kind of leading the charge here. Back to you, Chris.
Yep, those are two of my favorite areas to talk about. They're always the hardest part, I think, on a project, but also give the most opportunity for improvement. Next, we'll get into our key takeaways. So that was the roadmap that Richard did. You've heard us both talk a lot about investing in PeopleSoft today and continuing to make investments. I mentioned this early on. You're going to be on PeopleSoft potentially for quite a while, even if you have started or even if you're live today. And there's a lot of things you can be doing to help support your business and do it in a cost-effective way. I don't think you have to do a lot to add a lot of value to support your operations. The other investments you're making, like decustomization and others, business process improvement, maybe adding some new features. One new strategy we've been talking about a lot is, let's say you have this new bolt-on that you have to do. Well, let's look at doing that new bolt-on in something like Apex or something that is a little more cloud ready. And then in the future, you're not changing the front end, you're simply changing the underlying data points and the APIs. So there's a lot you can be doing now because you're going to be on PeopleSoft for quite a while. And then the second big point, and it's really similar, but when you're in day zero and you're not yet fully divested of your PeopleSoft on-prem application, do a lot of planning now. You can do so much today that will make that longer, larger, potentially last implementation ever much smoother. So one of the keys to this, when I think about doing a big investment, I always think about what is the reward? Well, the reward here is you're on a platform, and you really may never have to do another upgrade again. It's constantly being updated. I mean, I really do see a future where the application will update itself through the use of AI and other things. I know we're a ways away from that, but you're on a platform that is backed by one of the largest technology companies in the world. And doing that planning now to think about transformation and being ready for that last implementation, it not only helps you during the implementation, but it helps your consulting partner, because you've thought about all the things that Richard has talked about that often are things that we've seen during implementation. If we're meeting our customer for the first time on a cloud implementation, we haven't worked with them on their legacy application, that is a very challenging time because the expectations aren't there if they haven't gone through all of the things that Richard talked about. So those are the things we wanted to leave you with. My final slide is the next one, and I'll talk about, if you're interested in any of this, what we do, that roadmap that Richard talked about, it's usually Richard, myself, and Jeff Hilliard, who runs our PeopleSoft practice, and some of our supporting consultants from our various practice areas that walk you through this scorecard. And it starts with just understanding a little bit about you, a quick 30-minute intro about what we do. And then it's another free service that we offer to really walk through the scorecard and give you that initial process maturity of where you are in your readiness for cloud migration. And it's something you can do and then take the findings and work yourself, or obviously work with us or another partner to continue evolving and getting ready for your cloud transformation. You can email ps2cloud@elire.com, ps2cloud@elire.com. And then some of the upcoming conferences that we're going to be at: the National Lab IT Summit, April 8th through 11th, IGA, Quest Blueprint, and OATUG, the Ascend Conference. So those are some great conferences. I think I will be at Blueprint and Ascend this year, but I know others will be at NLIT and IGA. So if you're at any of those, please do reach out to us. We'd love to see you, and we usually have happy hours at those events. With that, I'll hand it over to Jordan for any questions. Oh, poll.
That's okay. We're going to do both at the same time. So to make it easier as well, if you are interested in that free cloud readiness scorecard, go ahead and share. Totally up to you. We will not be sharing that with the group, but just an easy in if you're interested in having a follow-up conversation. As we leave that up, we are going to get into our Q&A, and we do have a couple questions that have come in from the chat. The first one looks like it's geared more at people readiness. So what can my team do to be a value add part of our cloud project? Richard or Chris, whichever of you'd like to take it.
Yeah, I can jump in first, and maybe Richard can add. One of the things I think the most successful implementations I've seen have been when organizations backfill their current day-to-day jobs supporting their PeopleSoft systems or owning a business process with other resources so that those folks can be part full-time of an implementation. That's not obviously always the case, and it's almost rare that that's actually the case, but that is the best if you can do that. The other piece that I point out always is doing training. The Oracle offers a lot of training. Your reps have access to information, or like the Oracle training, Oracle University, I think it's called, and that's a good way to get started. Take that training before the implementation starts to upskill your team so they know what the partner is talking about when you start doing that, those workshops. And then finally, just observation that I've heard, because a lot of times, and this more comes from the tech side, where tech folks a lot of time think, well, if I move to the cloud, then I'm not going to have a job anymore because everything's in the cloud and you don't really need technical expertise. And I will tell you assuredly that that is not the case. So there are different skills and different things that you do within the cloud than you do in PeopleSoft, but there is a lot of technical needs within the application, at least as it stands today, until AI picks it up, in a couple decades or so, maybe a decade. Go ahead, Richard, if you have anything to add.
No, I think that was great. I think that was great. We can move on to if there are any other questions.
Yep, it looks like we have a few more. So, do you have pros and cons for coexistence and Big Bang? So coexistence versus Big Bang.
Yep, I can, let me jump in on that one too. So the first thing, and I mentioned this earlier, first off, every project I've been on that has even tried to do a full suite, like whether it's HR or finance, they still leave something behind. There's always something that gets left behind, and there has to be some kind of coexist there. The organizations that are not fully ready, well, let me back up a little bit. So there are organizations that have reasons why they need to stay on PeopleSoft because of either, like I mentioned before, hardware investments, or I mean, sometimes mandates. We do a lot of work, or we were in talks with a lot of federal government organizations, and they simply can't move for various reasons. So if you're not ready to move everything, sometimes it's great to dip your toes into a module, let's say succession planning. You don't have it in PeopleSoft. You know you want to implement this feature. Well, why don't you look at what the feasibility of implementing the framework within cloud, do the coexistence, and have that functionality there to set the foundation. A lot of times you're doing foundational type work when you're doing a cloud implementation. So doing some foundational work and getting that first step into the cloud, and then you can continue to expand as you add other pieces of functionality and then fully roll it out. I've been on some organizations where they've rolled out smaller subsets of a larger organization into the cloud to understand and have their team ready to support longer term what the larger, more complex full organization would look like. I do like full large or full big bangs of a suite, because it allows you to transform the entire business processes within, because often a business process spans from multiple modules. It's not just within core HR or accounts receivable. There's multiple modules that a business process spans. So by doing a full suite and even a full HR, HCM, and ERP together to really have the full business processes implemented is a luxury, but you do have to do a lot of planning. And with that, each of these different business processes will have a little bit of change or re-engineering that has to happen. So when you magnify that, the biggest con I see is, by the larger the project is, the more change that is needed to adopt and the longer the timeline of the implementation is. But you get rid of throwaway work, you get rid of a lot of clunky processes that will be gone once you do the full implementation.
Thank you, Chris. And we do have one, it looks like we have time for one more. If you do have additional questions, please feel free to keep submitting and we can follow up after or release them even in an FAQ. Oh, you'll like this one. Do you have lessons learned from other customers who already went through a cloud journey? And I know you probably have lots of answers, but maybe pick your top couple lessons learned.
So Richard, do you want to go first, or?
Yeah, I think one lesson learned that immediately springs to mind is, make sure you have alignment. I can think of a project that had more trouble than they should have, because part of the organization thought they were lifting and shifting, and the other part thought they were doing total transformation, right? And it seems like, oh, that's not that tough. You get through it. But that impacts everything down to your scoping decisions and your requirement decisions. and even how you're going to treat your data. So making sure you have alignment prior to kicking off the implementation is a really good lesson learned.
Yeah, that's a great one. And I think I already hit on this a little bit, but one of the, I mean, there's so many. So whoever asked that, we can set up the follow-up call, and I'll be happy to give you lots of lessons learned about our about this journey, because there really is so many different things that if I had only known that on the first couple of implementations, things would have been much smoother. And the reason why we built this roadmap, this idea and this maturity, is really from all of those lessons learned that we had. What are the key areas that we've stumbled upon, or the expectation of the client wasn't as clear as what we were saying in our response in the RFP? So if you outline all of those key areas and you have a strategy around all of those areas that we identified, you will be much more ready for that implementation. As far as more practical, quick one, business process reengineering ahead of time, and Richard hit on this a few times, is so critical. There's so many times where we, come into a project and we scope the project, and we understand the way that we think this should work. But the client's expectation was, well, they want to get rid of this module and replace it with something else, something that we weren't expecting. And then we have to almost stall that. You never have a chance to stall the project, but while the rest of the project is running, we're over here redesigning a critical process and really trying to fit it into the timelines that were established for not having to redesign. So giving yourself enough time, whether it's beforehand or during the implementation itself, giving yourself, a good chunk of time to think through the business process and be able to redesign is really important. And then one final one is, well, I'm going to give you two. One is backfilling your resources if you can, giving as much time. Resource constraints of your key subject matter experts is so critical to the success of a project that I can't stress that enough. So anything you can do to free up those resources is critical. And I forgot what my last one was, but that we'll leave you with that. That's a good little chunk.
Yeah. I one that comes to my mind, and I'll throw it back to Jordan, is because we know PeopleSoft, Chris started in PeopleSoft, right? Worked for them. Lots of our people did, but we know PeopleSoft and we know the cloud. So we understand how something works in one system and the other system, and being able to educate your own employees goes a long way in making the project go a lot smoother, is another good lesson learned.
Thank you both. And I know that we are at time here. So just a quick wrap up and a few housekeeping items. Be sure to follow us on social media. We're super active across LinkedIn, YouTube. Also, we do have a dedicated web page for PeopleSoft to Cloud. So Elire.com, services, PS to Cloud, and that PS to Cloud email. Just a quick reminder that the recording will be sent in the next couple of days. So keep an eye out. We'll also include the email address if you're thinking a little bit more about that cloud scorecard to reach out to Richard and Chris. And last thing, we do have newsletters that come out monthly for both PeopleSoft and Cloud that have a lot of great content. That registration is on our website, and we'll make sure to send it in the follow-up. I want to thank everybody for their time today. Thank Richard and Chris for their expertise, and hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.